Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com where music comes to life. And my guest today is probably the most versatile and one of the most in demand guitarists in music. You probably know him best from his time with the New York Dolls or alongside Michael Monroe. But he's here today to talk about a new solo record called The Concrete Jungle, which comes out on Record Store Day, April 20th. Please welcome Steve Conte. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff,
Yeah.
and welcome everyone. I just have to correct you on it. The album title is The Concrete Jangle. You see what I did there?
Ah,
You see
okay.
what I did there?
Yeah.
Concrete Jungle has been done too much. But
I like the
jangly
jangle.
pop music,
Yep.
jangly guitar music. If you've seen the cover of the album,
Mm.
it's a Rickenbacker
Yep.
guitar. So hence the
Nice, nice.
jangle.
So,
Um,
I mean, the first thing that jumps out about the Concrete Jangle is that you co-wrote side one with probably the most underrated writer of the last 40 years,
Not
and
to
that's
me.
Andy Partridge of Ecstasy. Now, how did you and Andy hook up?
Well, XTC has been like in my top five favorite bands since the early 80s. I
Mm,
mean, I grew up with the Beatles and Stones and Zeppelin
mm,
and Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart and all that. And then once the 80s, the punk era happened, I was I actually instead of like going punk or metal, Van Halen and kind
mm,
of Van Halen and punk happened at the same time. So
yeah.
everybody was either doing this
Mm,
or pogoing, like so but I, at that moment, at that point, I went into the jazz. I went completely out of
mm,
sync with, what was happening. And I went back to like 40s and 50s jazz, like Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, John Coltrane. And there were very few rock bands that I liked. I only liked the most musical. This was a bit of a snobbery on my part, but I only liked the most musical rock bands. And to me, they were The Police,
mm.
XTC, and The Pretenders. Because I love James Honeyman Scott. Um, but so I had heard, I guess it was English Settlement
Mm.
in the early 82, I guess that came out. I maybe heard it a year later. Played on my college radio station by Matt Pinfield. You know who that is?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Matt, Matt Pinfield
Still
was a DJ.
around, yeah.
Yeah, he was a DJ on my college radio station at Rutgers. And he was like, "That's XTC, melt the guns." And I ran out, got the record, and then went back and got every record before and every record since. And so Andy had been on my list of top 10 songwriters, for since then. He's up there with Lennon McCartney and Townsend and Costello and Jagger Richards and all those guys. And I happened to meet producer Steve Lillywhite
Mm.
at a party, and we became really good friends. And but before that, my guitar repairman was making a guitar for Andy, and I heard he was making a guitar for Andy Partridge. And I said, "You're kidding me! He's like one of my favorites. Please give him my record." And I had done this record with my brother, the Contes, we were called, and the record was Bleed Together. We gave that to Andy, and he really liked it. But at the time, he didn't have his own label or anything, so it just kind of we just heard back through the guitar maker. Andy really liked the album. Never had any contact with him, but then through Steve Lillywhite, I was chatting on Twitter with him one day, and he was like, I was mentioned XTC and the records, and he was like, "Oh, well, Andy's on Twitter. We should rope him into this conversation." And next thing I know, I'm chatting with Andy Partridge on Twitter, in full public view, back and forth, and he's like, "Wait, you played the New York Dolls?" Because this was during that era. And he said, "You stole my dream job." He said, "When I was 15, I wanted to be the guitar player in the Dolls, and I wrote David Johansen a letter and all this stuff." And then he heard that I was coming. So we were just kind of stayed in touch and tweeted back and forth for a bit. And then he heard that I was coming to play in Swindon, where he's from in England, with Alice Cooper and Michael Monroe. And he said, "I hear you're going to be in my shithole town." He says, I'll buy you lunch." So I was like, immediately screenshot, Andy Partridge is buying me lunch. I can't believe this. So I went there to the venue. I did my sound check, and then Andy and his engineer friend, Stuart Rowe, picked me up drove me back to their place. We had lunch. We hung out all day from between the sound check and my show time, and passed the guitar around back and forth, and just had a bunch of laughs. We were just getting along like friends, you know.
Yeah.
And he had given me some great quotes from my albums. I had sent him a couple of my the Bronx Cheer and Steve Conte NYC album, and he really liked them. Gave me some great, usable quotes from my promo and stuff. And then I thought, well, here I am. It's time to make a new record. And I thought, let me see if Andy will write the single with me. So I wrote him an email. I had been hearing these interviews on YouTube where he was like swearing off writing with other people because he would write for these artists and then the songs wouldn't get recorded. The record company or the manager or whatever would say it's too weird or whatever. But I said, look, Andy, if I write a song with you, there's no way it's not going to get used on my record. So he was like, well, Steve, I sort of swore off writing with other people, but it's not a no. Let me think about it. And so I went home and I wrote this piece and I recorded it, real kind of Beatles XTC production. And I sent it to him, and he said, "Well, that's great, but it sounds done. I can't really add anything to this." He goes, "Why don't we start something from scratch?" He said, "Let's do a Zoom," because he was in England, I was in the Bronx, and so that's what we did. And we did about 4 Zoom sessions, a couple hours each, and we wrote, instead of one song, we wrote 8 songs. Yeah.
You've written a ton of songs in your career, just all kinds of genres. You have an amazing understanding of what it means to construct a piece of music. What did you learn from writing with somebody like Andy?
Well, he writes unlike anyone else I've ever written with. He thinks and hears in visuals. I don't know if you can hear in visuals, but I mean, when he hears music, he sees visuals, and he writes from that. He's like cinematic almost with his writing. So there was one point where we were writing this. He said, "Well, what's your?" And he also has these great methods when you're getting stuck. We didn't get stuck very often, but we would come up with an idea, and then we'd go, "Okay, let's put that one on the side." He knew I was going to go away and work on it and come up with some stuff. And he's like, "Let's do something else." He said, "What song do you wish you had written?" And I said, "Oh, King Midas in Reverse by the Hollies." And he was like, "Ooh, that's a good one." And I knew he would like it too. And it's one of my favorite songs. So for some reason, I think it was on that song, he started playing this chord. I don't know if you can hear this.
Yep.
It's like an F chord with a open G string, so it's an F add 9. And he's like, "Wow, that sounds like a bell." And we wrote this song called "One Last Bell" because he thought that the guitar's sound and the chord reminded him of a bell ringing. And then it's the songwriter's job to figure out what are you going to write about a bell, right? Yeah. So then we came up with this whole idea about the bell ringing the truth in, and like the age of lies. This is wishful thinking, of course. And misinformation being over, and that this bell is ringing in the truth, and that's how that song came about. So he writes like that. He says, what does that sound like? What kind of picture does that bring up? And if you ever read any of his interviews about his own songs, that's what he says about plenty of his songs. Now, since it's working overtime, the XTC song.
Yep.
He heard that. I'm sorry about all this beeping. I don't know what's going on here. People are leaving me messages. I guess I don't know how to turn that off. Yeah, he said he heard, it sounded medieval to him, so he started writing about straw for the donkeys and, this like farm kind of sound. And, he's unique in that way. Never worked with anyone like him before.
The second half of the record is all songs that you wrote. Did
Yes,
you specifically write them for this project, or were they songs that you had that you knew would fit really well with what you did with Andy?
yes, and yes. Um, there are a few that there's one that goes all the way back to 1984,
Mm.
when I was just 4 years old. No. In fact, it was my second single, "Girl with No Name."
Yep.
I wrote that right around the time that XTC was making, I guess, probably between Mummer and the Big Express.
Mhm,
Um, I was very influenced by XTC during that era, and Beatles, of course, and Motown.
mhm.
So it's got a little of all that stuff in it. Um, but there's a song called "I Dream Her," which is the one that I sent him to see if he'd be interested in writing the single with me. I finished it myself. It's very kind of psychedelic and Beatles-ish. Um, so that was a newer one. I have one called "I'm Decomposing a Song for You." That's also very Beatles XTC. I had that hanging around for just a year or two.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think if I had anything that I wrote from scratch, knowing that I was writing with him. Um, Most of them were, within the few years prior to the project,
Mm.
except "Girl with No Name," which was 30 years old or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm looking back at your career, it's been so amazingly diverse. I mean, as you said, you've played jazz, you've done, kind of that alt country thing, you've done rock bands, you've played with people like Chuck Berry and Paul Simon and Willie Nile. You seem to thrive off of that kind of constant change and evolution. But is there one style where you're like, yes, this is Steve Conte?
Yes, all of them. I mean, if I could, and I've been trying to distill that into one thing for like my whole life. Like if I could write an album of songs that had the energy of punk rock with the musicality of, uh, with the lyrical poetry of, Andy Partridge and the Beatles and, Dylan, and then like the jazz guitar lines of John Scofield
Yeah.
or somebody, you know, but I mean, no one that I know of has ever been able to do that. It's still my dream to do that before I die. Um, and I'm getting a little closer on every album.
Yeah.
This is my new single, Shoot Out the Stars. I actually managed to slip a couple of bebop jazz riffs in the solo, which I haven't really heard anyone do.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, I love certain kind of, and that's what I think hopefully makes me different.
Yeah.
You know, most rock guys think jazz sounds like a bunch of wrong notes,
Mm.
so they don't usually play or they think it's too fancy or whatever. And most jazz guys think rock is too loud and dumb. So those two, the twain don't meet over on that side. And, so
Mm.
I'd like to somehow combine all those things and,
Mm.
you know, great songwriting, energy, and musicality,
Mm. Yeah, and a great song is a great song regardless of the genre, so I think if you put your own flourishes into it, you can make it into anything you want it to be. Mm.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah,
Now
especially if you're the producer and the artist.
right. Right.
I mean, like when I work with Michael Monroe, it's like everything's got to be. Well, I mean, this actually we just started recording a new album, and
Mm.
it's pretty varied now. I was able to sneak a couple of my Beatley things in there, but in the past, it's been like pretty much like keep it dumb, keep it punk rock, keep it simple three chords, and
Mm.
but I definitely can't or I haven't been able to bring in too much crazy stuff for the
Mm.
Monroe project. But this time I did bring in a couple of weird things that surprisingly made it to the recording sessions anyway. Whether they make the record, we don't know yet.
Mm.
So
Now, you'd mentioned the New York Dolls, and when they reunited and you got the call from David Johansen to fill the shoes of the late Johnny Thunders, I mean, what was your reaction? Were you a fan of the band? Was it, Andy mentioned how it's his dream job. Was it yours, or were you just like, okay, we got a new gig coming?
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah.
Um, it's been well documented that I didn't really know any of the songs or you know, um, which probably sounds like blasphemous to Dolls fans. How did this guy get the gig? It should have been me. But Johansson was at the point where he'd played with so many great musicians since the Dolls. He had great players in all his solo bands, and he was working with Jimmy Vivino, who's a friend of mine, and Larry Saltzman, who's a friend of mine. They played in his bands, the Harry Smiths, and Jimmy was working with him with Lee Von Helm from the band. And so he asked those guys, he said, I'm putting the Dolls back together. Who should I call? And they said, oh, don't call anyone else. Call Conte. He's got the right look. He's got the right guitars, and he's a pro, and blah blah blah. So Johansson was used to working with pros. He wasn't going to get, I guess, some garage band guy, just because he sounded like Thunders. So, but I did my homework, and I took, I realized what it was that Thunders did, and I distilled it down to, Chuck Berry and Keith Richards with the amp turned up to 11. You
Mhm.
know,
And as that band went on, we lost Arthur Kane. Sam Yaffa came in and filled in when Arthur passed. Was he your link to hooking up with Michael Monroe?
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Because the two of them were in Hanoi Rocks together since Sammy was a kid. And yeah, we had played. The Dolls had played in Michael's hometown of Turku, Finland, where he was living at the time in 2009.
Mm.
And Michael brought a saxophone, and he came on stage and played "Human Being" with us, I think, or it was some Dolls tune that had saxophone. Maybe it was "Personality Crisis." I don't
Mm.
remember. But I met Michael, and I guess Sammy started rekindling an old friendship with him. And next thing I knew, the two of those guys were working on a new project, and the Dolls' work was starting to slow down. And I just had a kid, and I was like, man, I need to work. And Sammy called and said, "Do you want to come and play some gigs with Michael?" I said, "Sure, I need the gigs." So I went and I played with Michael, and then they offered me the gig, and I thought I was going to be able to do both.
Mm.
Actually, me and Sammy both
Yeah.
were thinking we could be in both bands, but then the management went ahead and booked a Dolls recording session for a new record on the same day that we were scheduled to go in and start recording a record with Michael. So we couldn't do it, and then they got other guys, and then that was sort of the end. You
Mm.
know. But yeah, Sammy was my connection to Michael, and now it's been 15 years this year. Wait a minute,
Yeah.
been 10. No, 14 years this
Mm.
year. It's the longest I've ever been in any one band.
And much like Andy, I don't think Michael has ever really gotten his due, at least here in the US, for just the amazing artist he is. But when you play kind of those Nordic countries and those European countries with Michael, what's the reaction like there for him?
Oh well, in Finland, he's a legend, and he's a star, and he's on TV. He's got books out. He's
Mm.
got he's on the Voice of Finland.
Yeah.
Like the Voice TV show. He was a judge on The Voice, and now he's got a documentary about his life, and he's just. I mean, to be famous like that in a small country like Finland, I mean, we've somehow been able. It's an amazing thing. It would be impossible, I think, to do here in the States because it's so huge.
Mhm.
Look, I mean, plenty of bands have done it, but it was a long time ago that they did it. Aerosmith, and
Yeah.
these rock bands don't come out now and get that big here in the U.S. As we know, it's all about hip hop and all that
Mm.
modern stuff. You um, but so he's a legend, and as he should be. He gets
Yeah.
out there, gives 200%, just wrapping the mic around his neck and climbing up on the lighting trusses and doing splits and, playing harmonica and saxophone and singing and fronting and just looking amazing every night. And, so of course
Yeah.
we'll go
Now,
absolutely insane for him in Japan. And I mean, we have our pockets. I mean,
yeah.
Finland, the biggest markets are Finland, Japan, England.
Mm.
And then we sort of dabble in Sweden and Norway, and then, Italy and Spain and Germany, and really not many other. We've done South America once. We've done the States twice
Mm.
in 14 years. But, it's amazing that we've been able to keep up the work, in Finland. We just got to keep putting out new albums. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
And you're always doing something with Michael. You just mentioned the list of countries you guys play. Do you have any plans at all to kind of put a tour together on your own for the Concrete Jangle, or you're not going to be able to do any
Well,
stateside shows?
I just put together a new band, and we have our first shows coming up. Being in Connecticut, maybe you know about this already. Do you know about my New Haven show?
No.
Oh,
Breaking news here.
The 29th of March, I'm going to play Cafe 9.
Love that place.
All right, so I'll see you there.
Definitely. And
Shoot me an email, and I'll make sure you get
yeah.
in.
And for those that watch the site, I also, photograph shows and things like that. So I'd love to come down, take some pictures of you guys on stage and really get the word out there.
Sure. Yeah, we're doing that. And then in May, I'm going to play Joey Ramone's birthday bash here
Hmm.
in Manhattan. And as many other gigs as I can get before I have to leave for the summer to go play with Michael in Europe. And that's really what happens every summer. That's
Yeah.
like, I don't have a job. That's my job. That's my the summers are for European touring.
Hmm.
And then I come home and I do my own stuff during the year.
Yeah. Well, we've been spending some time here with Steve Conte. The record is called The Concrete Jangle. It's out on Record Store Day, April 20th. Thank you so much for
Can I
doing
say
this. I
something about
appreciate the time.
Can I say something about Record Store Day, please?
Please do. Love
I
it.
don't know when this is going to come out. This broadcast. When will it?
Probably sometime before Record Store Day, a week or two before, probably.
Okay. So Record Store Day is April 20th,
Mhm.
4/20 for you pot smokers. Um, and what you need to do, if you're interested in getting a copy, it's going to be exclusive on Record Store Day. It comes out on vinyl, exclusive for 30 days. It's not going to be available physical product anywhere else. I think maybe you can get a download somewhere, but
Mm.
if you want the physical product, you got to call up your local independent record store and ask them to order you a copy of the Concrete Jangle, and then go on Record Store Day to the store and pick up your copy. Yeah.
Definitely. I will be in line to get mine. That's for sure.
All right. Well, thanks, man.
Well, Steve, thanks a lot. Best of luck with the record, and we'll see you at Cafe 9 coming up the end of March.
Thank you, Jeff. Shoot me an email about that.
You got
And
it, my friend.
everyone,
Thank you. Yep.
see you.